Hey there, John Moore here, and I am a shamanic teacher from Maine in the US. I teach shamanism, I practice shamanism, I live and breathe shamanism. Shamanism is my life. Anyway, today I'm going to talk to you about personal altars. I'm going to give you some ideas for personal altars. I want to talk about why you might want to set up a personal altar, and I'm going to give you some tips about things like, what if I don't have a lot of space? What should I put on my altar? What do I use my altar for? So I think everybody kind of has an idea of what an altar is. If you've ever been to a church or a temple or what have you, you've seen an altar at the front of the room. So an altar is basically a surface on which you place some focus for spiritual use. That's as simple and as generic as I can make it, because they're all different kinds of altars and they're used for all different sorts of things. So in church, they might lay out an offering on an altar, or they might baptize people in front of an altar, or the Bible might be put on an altar. But in my personal practice, I have a bit of an altar issue. I've got altars all over the place. I've got indoor altars, outdoor altars, altars to ancestors, altars to, for very specific purposes. In fact, later on in this video, I'm going to share some pictures of some of my personal altars, only because I want to use them to make specific points about the way they can be set up and the way they can be used. And really an altar, unless you're following a really rigidly prescripted form of spirituality, can be set up almost any way you wish. When I teach shamanism, we normally set an altar up either on the floor, using an altar cloth. So, create a special surface, place candles around it, something in the center, sacred objects on the altar cloth. And it becomes an area of spiritual focus. It becomes an area around which the class gathers. Now, when I teach, we always sit in a circle. It just is, it's just how it is. It's how it works. It works better that way. And so there's always an altar in the center that sort of is an area of special focus. And this is really a good use of altars as a way to bring spiritual focus. You can meditate in front of an altar, for example, or you can pray in front of an altar, or you can place things on an altar that, you want imbued with certain spiritual intention or energy or anything along those lines. You can also set up altars to honor spirits. And so, for example, ancestral altars, and I'm going to show you a picture of part of my ancestral altar. Or, if you were of a particular religion or path, you might have pictures of spirits there. You can also place photos of loved ones on an altar. Sometimes if you want to have them be protected or give them extra energy, you can also put people's names on or under an altar. That's a really typical shamanic practice. I also have an outdoor altar, which I use to honor the nature spirit, so I use it to leave offerings. So offerings are a fantastic use of an altar, and I make offerings to ancestors as well, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So that being said, altars can be all sorts of shapes and sizes and that sort of thing, and it doesn't always have to be a permanent structure. Sometimes we live in a space or are in a space where having an extra piece of furniture there doesn't make a lot of sense, or we, for some reason, need to hide some of our spiritual practice. Some people might be living in families that might not accept very specific spiritual practices. And that's fine. So what you can do is you can have a temporary altar, and that is usually you'll have a cloth or a bundle of some altar items. And this is really common in sort of Andean shamanism. They lay out a cloth and they place things on it representing specific things, and they do that on the ground. And that's perfectly fine, especially because Mother Earth is very sacred to them. It's very sacred to me. It's very sacred to a lot of cultures. So I do a lot of when I set up a temporary altar, it's usually on the ground. If you don't have a lot of space, but you want a more permanent structure, and I'm going to share a couple of my really small altars with you, and space is always a premium, or a premium for most people. You can use things like a shelf or a windowsill, and I'm going to show you later on. I'm going to show you two of my altars, one being on a shelf and one being on a windowsill. So it's a very tiny altar, and for very specific purposes. It's fine. It's a space. It's a flat surface on which I can place objects. I can do spiritual work there. I can journey or pray or do all kinds of things there, or just use it as a place of spiritual focus. Let me give you some personal altar ideas, some things to think about when you want to set up a personal altar. Think about the purpose. It can be very general, or you can say things like, to yourself that, maybe this is an altar where I want to meditate. And so you want items on that altar that would be useful in meditation, or that would inspirit you with the spirit of meditation. You wouldn't necessarily want things that would be distracting or take your mind away from meditation, or things that took away from the energy of meditation in some way. Or you might have an altar that, as I have an outdoor altar where I make offerings to nature spirits, and that's sort of the purpose of that altar. And so I needed something that will be for that. I needed something that would be outdoors, so it's made out of stone, and it's fine to the weather, has a flat surface that I can place things on. It's fairly small, so it's not gonna stick out if the neighbors are passing by or whatever, and it's tucked away in an alcove, in a wooded alcove, and it's just a nice little private space where I can commune with nature spirits. I can leave offerings for them, and so that sort of suits my purpose. You can place any objects you want on your altar. In general, if you do spiritual work there is this kind of rule of thumb that the objects you leave there become sacred objects because they pick up the energy of the space, and things in space hold energy. And so you can think a little bit about the materials and the images of the things that you're leaving there. So you might leave a little statue of, let's say a Buddha if you wanted to, or Norse gods and goddesses, or what have you, whatever pantheon you're sort of working with. If you're shamanic, you might have figures representing your power animal there, because that is a spirit that you work with quite frequently. And so you might have representations of those as a way of honoring them and as a way of feeling more connected. Again, if it's an ancestral altar, you might put pictures of your ancestry. Or if you don't have pictures of your ancestors, I am lucky enough that there are existing photos of my great-great-grandfather and his family from the late 1800s. So I do have a photo on my altar. But then I also have something that I inherited from my great-great-grandmother on my other side. So these are, connections to both sides of my family, to my ancestors. You can also represent ancestors on your altar by placing items that are connected if you have a specific sort of ethnic or national background. So, part of my ancestry is Norse, and so I might have items from, that represent, I might have but I might have a Viking longship or something there. Or I might have something from my Irish ancestors there, or, something representing the areas where my ancestors came from in lieu of images or specific items that they owned. You want the items on your altar to be a little bit special, spiritually special. You want to take care of an altar as if it were a portal between worlds, a doorway between worlds. So you don't want to clutter it up with non-spiritual items. Now, I have altars that are covered with items, but all of them have very special meaning or spiritual purpose for being there. Here's my coffee mug from my desk. I'm not going to place my coffee mug on my altar. or place an empty Twinkie wrapper or what have you on my altar, because it needs to hold, like, I need to show respect for that. And I come from a martial arts background, and I come from a Japanese martial arts background. And we, at the front of our dojo, or the school that we practice in, we had something called the kameza, which is an altar, which means literally seat of the spirits. And it is a place that we, before class, invite the spirits in to watch over us and protect us and make sure we're practicing safely and learning things. And then at the end of class, we bow to the kameza to say thank you to the spirits. Thank you for watching over us and keeping us safe and helping us learn things. And there are very strict rules about that. It has to be kept clean in a very special way, and you don't ever turn your back to the kameza. And so there's sort of little rules about keeping this altar space sacred. And that should be the same with your altar. Even if it's temporary, you wouldn't, if I were to set up an altar on the floor, I wouldn't do things like step on it or step over it or, sit on it or, that sort of thing. So treat it really in a sacred way, and it will treat you well. It's like, it's a tool, it's a sacred tool. And the more you take care of it, the more it will take care of you. Altars to specific spirits like ancestors, if you use them and you use them correctly, and if you're leaving offerings on them, and I highly recommend making offerings to ancestors, and I will do another whole video on ancestor work very soon. Your altar space is going to become a doorway for spirits to come and go, and that is in your home. And so there's something to understand. You might not want to place that altar. I don't put an ancestral altar in my bedroom because my great grandparents would perhaps keep me up at night. But they have an honored place, and it's in my dining room where the family gathers to eat. And so it is almost like we're inviting them in for supper, and that's a great way to think of it. It's a great way to think of an altar as a space that you're inviting spirit in to commune with you, to do work, to help you, but also to honor them. Shamanism is really about relationship with spirit. Not that you're necessarily following shamanism, I'm just talking from my perspective, but in shamanism, everything is about being in relationship. A relationship to the environment, relationship to other people, relationship to our community or tribe, relationship to spirit and to specific spirits. And so these are things you want to think about when you set up a personal altar. How does this reflect the relationship that you want to have? If it is honoring a specific spirits or types of spirits or what have you, how do you be in relationship with them? And offerings are a great way. I'll talk about that in a separate video. I'm going to stop this video now, but then I'm going to show you some pictures of my altars, and I'm gonna talk over them a little bit. So hang on, and I'll show some stuff to you very shortly. Okay, so what you see here is just a tiny corner of a windowsill where I have some sacred objects, and I use this windowsill in my office as an altar space. There's some other things on it, but it's very small, and there's some sacred objects there. And I just wanted to show you this to point out that you can have an altar space that is extremely small. Okay, and this is part of my ancestral altar. I have a picture of some of my ancestors. I have a water kettle thing that my great-great-grandmother gave me, and or didn't give me, but I inherited from, and and some cups that I make offerings in, and some candles and other things. And again, this is a really small space, and there's just a few things here, but it is a nice focus of ancestor worship. This is kind of a special purpose altar. This altar is set up for, sort of material wealth, abundance, taking care of the material needs of my family. This is set up on a shelf. Like I said, you can use a shelf. If you have a bookshelf, you can dedicate a single shelf or multiple shelves. This is a single shelf. It's in the heart of my house. and it's dedicated to taking care of the material needs of my family. It's a special use altar, doesn't take up a lot of room. It has, a number of sacred and representational objects, and that's just kind of what that is. So kind of last but not least, this is a little bit of a long shot towards my outdoor altar. You can see it's a small stone altar with a couple of objects on there. And I did this sort of a long shot to show that it's sort of tucked back into the woods a little bit next to my house, but is a place that I can get to easily. It is very simple, but it's also, because it's stone, it's, it weathers well. It doesn't, it's not going to get destroyed by snow or rain or what have you. But, if you have the space and you have the area, it's a good idea to make relationships with the spirits of land. And this is an outdoor altar for that purpose. So those are just a few of my altars. Like I said, I have a number of them, and it's not for you to replicate what I do or you have to do what I do, but just to give you some ideas of some of the different ways you can set up a personal altar. Outdoors, indoors, small space, larger space, dedicated area, temporary area. I didn't show any temporary altars because I don't have one set up, because they're temporary, but you can really make it your own, and you don't have to have a big space or lots of sacred objects or any of those things. As long as it is sacred to you and you treat it as such, it will be a useful spiritual tool for you. So hope you stay happy and healthy, and I will talk to you real soon.